All right, so what I'll be doing is I'll giving an introduction to the Changemakers Toolkit, what its purpose is, how we think it might be useful, and then having a look at some of the content. I'll be having the screen share up pretty much all the time. I've also got a mirror board open in the background in the hope that we might be able to give one of the exercises a go. The Changemakers Toolkit was developed with funding from the Wikimedia Foundation and was done in partnership between Wikimedia UK and the Sheila McKechnie Foundation. They're an organisation with a very strong track record of campaigning in the UK to bring about social change. And the idea was that this addresses a specific need within the Wikimedia movement. As part of the movement strategy, there was a general consensus that the movement isn't great at communicating and advocating for its own needs. It's had some significant wins, stuff to do with like freedom of panorama, but the knowledge could be more evenly distributed rather than have pockets where some people know an awful lot and the general movement is much less aware. So this is the intention of this toolkit is to help people develop some of those skills. And even if they are practiced and experienced change makers, then some of the thinking around this can be really helpful. My role initially was to adapt this to a wiki scenario. But going through the contents, yeah, it was really helpful to think about change making and how some stuff that I've been doing in my own work, convincing organizations, uh, doing a bit of public communications, has been a type of change making. And thinking about problems and challenges in different ways has been really helpful. So we have the toolkit hosted on MetaWiki, which we have on screen currently. We also have the same content on WikiLearn. The idea being that this is going to be a learning hub for the Wikimedia movement. You can badge people to confirm they've gone through the course. For the purposes of this walkthrough, I'll be using MetaWiki, but if you want to give the toolkit a go, I strongly recommend doing it on learn.wiki as a more interactive platform where there are videos embedded from YouTube. It's really very helpful. And it's something we're going to be using a bit more in the future, I think. And also, it's really useful to see who's using the toolkit. So with learn.wiki, we know who's enrolled in the course, how long it's taken them to complete. With MetaWiki, we don't really know that kind of thing. And it's helpful to get an idea of who's using it and what kind of groups we're engaging with. So at the moment, these resources are kind of out there, but myself and Daria will be thinking about how we can promote them and who might use them. So I think it's probably going to be useful for pretty much all the program staff to just at least be aware that this is a resource that exists. I think it might be quite useful for our Wikimedians in residence as well. So the idea being that we support our residents with the wiki side of things, bringing together that institutional knowledge and helping them learn about the various projects. If we have resources they can use to advocate around that work, that could be really helpful. And so this is something which I could see being handy for especially Wikimedians residents as they're starting out, because it's got some Wikimedia specific case studies, but even for experienced Wikimedian residences, it could be very handy, I think. So the experience of it so far is that Sheila McKechnie, they also have their own version of the toolkit on their website. They're happy with the level of engagement. There's been kind of one big push when it was announced. One thing they've noticed is that people will come to the toolkit, go through it, and then not engage with Sheila McKechnie afterwards. That's kind of the nature of this toolkit, essentially. the resource doesn't have that kind of community element which Sheila McKechnie are used to. So they've been considering how they can adjust it to open up some communication between people taking the course and them as an organization. So that might be something we want to consider as well with this. But I think that we can have a specific group in mind, like Wikimedians in residence who might be using it, or people that train the trainer. So it's adding to that range of skills that people are picking up on. And I would think that even if people are experienced communicators and campaigners, thinking about things from a different direction can be very helpful. So let's have an overview of the content. It's broken down into 3 modules about introducing change making, so the idea of campaigning and communicating, analyzing what problem you're facing and planning the steps to bring about that social change, and then communicating what those activities and campaigns involve. Each of those modules is broken down into 5 segments. There's an introduction. There are then 3 methods or tools which are explained and explored within that module, and then a conclusion. Each of those modules has an explanation, a case study to anchor it to Wikimedia and our concerns, and then you're kind of set an exercise, the idea being that you get to progress through it yourself. You can bring your own idea to that, or an exercise is set for you. So some of the exercises are not Wikimedia specific. So our thinking with that is that if you abstract it or take it to a different situation, that can be very helpful for engaging different modes of thinking. So some of the homeworks that we're setting are actually getting you to think about environmental stuff or challenges to do with homelessness. So it's, though this is for a Wikimedia audience, we are trying to broaden it in terms of different circumstances, just so that we're finding different ways of engaging people and getting them thinking about it. So let's have a browse of one of the modules, the Introduction to Change Making. So as we can see here, we've got the different parts of the module at the top to help with navigation. This is the introduction, explaining what the purpose of this module is, the key concepts it will cover, and what will the outcomes be. At the very start, the page said that it might take 1 or 2 hours per module. We've actually found that it can be a good deal quicker than that. The main time investment comes in the homework tasks and how quickly you go through those. What we've found is that some of those can actually be very quick. The format is, these work really well as group exercises, but we're hoping they function still as individual activities. But as an individual activity, it's an awful lot quicker. So as a group activity, the discussion for, say, a homework activity could take 20 or 30 minutes. If you're doing it on your own, it might be much more like 5 minutes, you've exhausted your ideas and ready to move on. So I think that as a passive tool, we might see people going through it very quickly. If it's something where we're handing to people and saying, you can go through this in your own time. If we've got something like Train the Trainer or Wikimedia Residence network meeting, where we're setting some of these tasks and breaking off into groups, then we could see a much more involved discussion. At Wikimania, we gave one of the exercises a go. I think we only gave about 10 minutes for the exercise, but it could very easily have been much longer, say 20 minutes, half an hour. People were, in the room at least, were running with the idea. I'm less certain how effective it was online. I would imagine it was a kind of a case of people were going through much more quickly. Part of the issue is that we don't have a space we can really direct people to where these exercises sit as something you can engage with. Mostly they are PDFs and image files which you would need to download and edit, or more likely recreate at home with a pen and paper. They are not terribly complex. It's more about how the information is framed. Speaking of which, let's move on to one of the tools, the social change grid. This is the exercise we went through at Wikimania. So the idea being that this particular activity will help with mapping different groups that you might be interacting with around your campaigning. So it puts them on two axes. The vertical axis goes from formal to informal, and the horizontal one goes from individual to societal. And each of those segments has its own kind of label. So something that is individual and informal can be quite community. And at the other end of the scale, we've got societal and formal. That might be institutions, so museums, governmental departments, that kind of thing. We do then have, that section explains those ideas in a bit more detail. A populated table to give you an idea of what kind of groups fit within this. And it's not just groups as well. Since there's an individual end to this scale, we're looking at personal things as well. So we have kind of this description of each of the sections. For the informal societal quarter, that's where public pressure is effective. And when it comes to institutions, so the formal societal group, it's speaking truth to power. And then it perhaps works a bit better at full resolution because the colors stand out a bit more. But looking at the different groups that are active in these areas. So with public pressure, there's influencers, boycotts, mass media, strikes. Now, not all of these will be directly transferable to the Wikimedia movement. A strike within the Wikimedia movement would be very challenging to organize. I suppose that the blackouts back in 2011 or 12, I want to say, might be the closest that Wikimedia has come to a strike. But that's more of an exceptional thing. And I think a key aspect is to not disrupt Wiki as far as possible. So a lot of these activities were taking place outside of Wikipedia itself. So some of these will be transferable to the Wikimedia movement. Some of these might not be. And some of them might be quite exceptional in how they could be expressed. And we then explore this through a Wikimedia-specific case study. So this particular example is about the She Said program. So it's a campaign to get people to contribute to wiki quotes. And that was run with a particular Africa focus. I think the campaign might be running currently. If not, then it very recently concluded for this year, because I saw they were again making very good use of social media. And when planning a campaign, the advice is to use some kind of coverage from all 4 segments, if possible. And if you have a plan, mapping it here can be very useful to show which sections you might not be engaging just yet. And how you can then work out which ones you might need to invest some more time in. If you don't have ideas for a particular segment, then it perhaps suggests that you need more people involved who can bring other ideas in. Or if there's something which is kind of aspirational you want to do, but don't have the connections or time yet, then again, that shows that there's more investment needed in that area. So with the Wikimedia movement, we are pretty strong on the community side of things, the informal individual stuff. So that's where you get editathons, community initiatives such as editing campaigns. Uh, and it's also where you get self-led editing as well. And applying a framework to that is what kind of converts it from one person editing along on their own into a campaign and contributing towards that shared goal. Towards the larger scale, societal scale of things, is where Wikimedia can sometimes have, well, not so much a struggle, but it's more difficult. I think the community editing thing comes very naturally, but the societal thing is the next step along. So there was really good media coverage driven by putting quotes on social media. Um, so they were taking the quotes which were being contributed to Wikiquotes, pairing them with a graphic and sharing them on social media. And that was getting a lot of traction. Um, and it was also an opportunity to engage with institutions, so universities, professional organizations, to get them to contribute as well, because it had that aspect of the gender gap. It's an opportunity to speak truth to power and get them to put a spotlight on underrepresented groups. And I think Wikimedia is actually very good at speaking truth to power, even if that power is sometimes being held by Wikimedia itself, because the movement are quite prepared to say, we're not doing well enough in this particular topic area. There are these gaps, and we want to proactively work with that. So this campaign addressed those different areas very well. And there are even some links we can find out some more information, references in a very wiki way. The exercise with this is looking beyond a Wikimedia specific thing. At least that's how it started out. This is the one we used at Wikimania initially. We were looking at an environmental challenge. And at Wikimania, there were lots of discussions about the climate and environment. And so we thought this would be a really good exercise to use. And several people in the room took this and asked if they could change it. They said, what if we change the scenario to be making a conference more environmentally friendly, more uh, more green, essentially. And I love that people were running with that idea. And there were some really good thoughts on how to make that work, like which groups you could engage with, where the formal and informal power lies, and how you could work collectively and individually. So there was a lot of really interesting thought with that. What I have done, I was originally going to use a Jamboard, but I think it's edit only these days. Sorry, view only. So I've set up a mirror board. Let's use the idea of the Celtic knots and what could be done better with that, because actually that's something we'll be considering in the future. So let's use Post-it notes to start populating this grid. What I'll do is I'll go on mute, but if anyone has particular Post-it notes they'd like to share as they add them, you're very welcome to unmute and share them with the group. Yeah, start. So let's take 5 minutes to add things in, and then I think we'll should be on track to wrap up by quarter 2. We'll
Could
have a
you,
couple of minutes to reflect on what's been added.
sorry, could you share the link to the Meta Toolkit so we can see the filled in one as a memoir, please?
Oh, there you go.
Thank you.
some really interesting suggestions coming through. I, th I think as well that it shows that some activities can flip very easily from one section of the grid to another. So we've got in the individual informal section, sharing in pre-conference groups about green travel. So that is very individual driven and informal. So it absolutely belongs there. You could kind of go the next step and start posting about it on social media. So then it becomes much more public. It switches from the individual to societal side of things. And depending on what voice you're doing that in, that could be perhaps either formal or informal. So if you're doing it from your own account, that could be something that's quite informal. If an organization, such as the chapter, was doing it, that could be quite formal. Stuart, far away.
The distinction between individual and societal, I find a little bit confusing, but like in terms of, because we were talking about like individual actions or societal actions, and like it would make more sense if it was collective to me. If that is, if we're talking about actions, you know,
Yeah, I think it is about actions. Collective
Okay.
is probably a better way of framing it, really. Um, yeah, I think that's probably a very useful change. This tool has been developed by Sheila McKechnie, so we've essentially just taken their terminology. But thinking about what works and what doesn't, and what might kind of be a stopper, is very helpful. Yeah, I would look
I'm
at
just
this
noticing
as
we haven't like got much in this in this on the societal axis comparatively.
yeah.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Mm. All right, that is 5 minutes. So we'll call it there in the interest of time. Um, you know what? I would say that an email campaign to organizers might fit under speaking truth to power. It could kind of float. So a campaign would, I think, perhaps be more towards the societal end of things. If it was just one person emailing, I think it'd be on the left-hand side of the axis. It's one of those things which it can float about depending on the approach there. So there's some very useful stuff there. Does anyone want to pick out something that they've added? Okay.
I was just thinking about things that I've seen at conferences and events where they've been putting an emphasis on, yeah, we're trying to run this as a green, or we're trying to decrease our impact,
Mhm.
and wondering where they sit on the grid, which was interesting. So things like Open UK, when they were at COP26, and in fact, actually, I think at all of their events more recently, and Wikimedia Deutschland do this as well, of like there's no meat options. It's also, so it's things around like because my event brain is on, so it's things around yeah, we're gonna do things around the infrastructure of the event that have, which is the sort of, I put it at the societal end because I'm thinking, well, that's, as the conference organizers is the yeah, institution almost. I've sort of replaced societal with institution.
Yeah.
To go, this is what we're going to do in terms of our event infrastructure to
Mhm.
decrease these kind of impacts. But that's interesting because as Stuart was saying about the societal one, I'm like, yeah, for me that's in the example of Celtic Knot, I'm thinking of more around the kind of institution level.
Yeah.
But
Oh,
then I'm not sure
absolutely.
if I've understood correctly. So.
No, I think so. And it is about, is this helpful for you as a way of considering things? And the institution as well might not just be the organizer, but the funders behind the organizers. Are are they doing enough to encourage green options? Are they considering them at all? Because it's often not just about this one event, but what comes next as well. So thanks very much for your time with this, folks. Are there any thoughts on this as a tool? I mean, not specifically the social change grid, but the overall kind of Changemakers toolkit. Is this something that, so my thinking was perhaps useful for trainers, and I would hope very useful for residents. Does this look something that could be rolled out in some way?
Potentially, yes. I've jotted down some thoughts. I'll maybe have a chat with you about it when we're talking later today.
Sure.
Because we've got the trainer sharing session coming up next weekend after the Saturday afternoon. So it could be something that we could kind of bring up there and see if it's the sort of thing that might appeal to the folks in the room, sort of test the waters a
Yeah.
little bit and see if there's maybe something there. And then because there's also the I don't have a good name for it, supporting editors working in challenging spaces event that I'm going to do at the end of January.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if there's a jump off point or a link that we can make there, but I'll have a look through. But yeah, I'll chat to you about it later this afternoon.
It's perhaps a bit of a tangent and maybe not something to pick up here, but I wonder, with that kind of session that's being done with trainers, is there like a badging system or some way? Basically, are we giving people recognition for the time they're doing this? Because that's come up with the Changemakers toolkits. This is good. Are we doing enough to kind of gamify it with giving people something to be able to show to others and put it on their CV? Skill they picked up.
The thing that we've added at the end of the Open Refine Wiki Learn is as well as the certificate, is the code to stick the badge on your talk page, on your user page.
Nice one.
So feel free to steal that.
Yeah, part of the closing section is you can use a barn star on your page.
Oh, yeah, cool.
I think WikiLearn might have options to be more linked open data-y thing about it. I'm not sure can't remember what the proper term is, but there's an infrastructure it could potentially hook into. Anyway, I think that's quite enough talking from me. So I'm going to stop the recording and we'll call that at the end of the Changemakers Toolkit intro session.